Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm Karen McQuestion. My co-host Tess Thompson is not here today. She was called away on a family emergency. Her dad had some unexpected surgery, so we're going to go on without her, but she'll definitely be missed. Today, we're excited to have Simone St. James with us. Simone is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of The Sundown Motel and The Broken Girls. Her debut novel, The Haunting of Maddie Clare, won 2 Rita Awards from Romance Writers of America and an Arthur Ellis Award from Crime Writers of Canada. Her newest novel, The Book of Cold Cases, was deemed most anticipated novel by Pop Sugar, Crime Reads, and Goodreads. Simone spent 20 years behind the scenes in the television business before leaving to write full-time. She lives just outside of Toronto, Canada, with her husband and a spoiled rescue cat. Welcome, Simone.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm excited you could make it. I love your books. We always start off by asking about the author's background. How did you become a novelist?
Well, I worked many years at a desk job. My bio says that I worked in the television business, and when people read that, they always assume that I was like a foreign correspondent or something really exciting, and I was not. I had a desk job in which I literally did Excel spreadsheets every day. I would do that all day, and then I would go home at night and write books, and that's what I did for years and years. And I wrote, I think, two and a half entire novels, sent them out to querying to agents, got rejected. I got rejected for 6 years. And then eventually wrote a book that, again, I was at the point where I was like, well, this is no one's ever going to want to read this. And, but I liked it. So I wrote it and I sent queries out. And it was the old days of 2009 in which you snail mailed your query letters. I queried some agents and I had a bunch of rejections, and I had one agent who called me and said, I love this and I can sell it and I adore it. And she sold it, and it became my first book, The Haunting of Maddie Clare. So it really was just a standard story of just like keeping at it and sending out material over and over and over and over and over again until you write the right thing and send it to the right person.
So did you quit your job right away then, or did you do both for a while?
I did both for a while because, you get that first contract and it's like, wow, this could just go away at any minute, which is actually still the case in any author's life. It can all go away at any minute. There's no, permanent job, although that's like a lot of industries. There's no permanent jobs anymore. But yeah, I got that first contract and it was like, well, this could be gone. So I kept my job and I did both for a while. So that changed things in that I was now writing to deadline as well as working. I almost just lost my mind. After about 2 years of that, I was just beside myself. I would work all day and come home and work until 10:30 at night, drop into bed, get back up at 5 o'clock the next morning. And that's all I did. All my weekends were writing, all my holidays, all my Christmas, my New Year's, my birthdays, everything was writing. So I just was about to drop dead, and my husband had kind of had it. And I said, I really want to quit my job and make a real full-time go of this. And he said, yeah, you should do that. He was really supportive. So, and we don't have kids, which is a big factor. So yeah, it took a couple of years, but eventually, yeah, I did make that leap and I quit my job. And it was like, I took a big cut in pay and took the big leap and really doubled my workload and doubled down and tried to just ramp it up.
And it worked out really well for you.
Yeah, eventually. It did take a couple of years. I mean, it was a lean couple of years in there. But like I say, we didn't have kids. So, we were just like, well, if we were eating peanut butter sandwiches every day, I mean, that's just us, right? So but we didn't have to eat peanut butter every day. But we did have, there was a lean period with no haircuts and no new clothes. I'll say that much. No vacations.
And don't you find with writing novels, it's not just the time per se, it's the emotional space. So you're going from work, you have to pull yourself out of that and enter the world of the novel. That had to be really challenging.
Actually, the worst was the other way around because I would get up in the morning and I had a commute on a train. And so my morning commute was my reading time and my kind of notebook time, my spiral notebook time, because I wouldn't bring a laptop with me to work. But it was my spiral notebook time and my sort of brainstorming time. And I would really ramp up my creative brain first thing in the morning on that train ride. And I would have, or I would read and all these ideas would be bubbling through my head. And then I'd get to work and people would be like, yeah, answer this email and go to this meeting. And I'd be like, God, like I have important things to do. Like I can't go to this meeting. I had to pull myself out of the creative brain into the office brain. And that was very hard. And then the other way around, being so exhausted at the end of the day and going back into the creative brain, all of it was very difficult. And I was writing a book a year, which sounds great, but it actually means you're always working on 3 books at the same time, because as you're writing one book, you're researching and planning the next book. And then you finish that book, and then you're revising and or editing or copy editing or proofreading the last book while you're writing the next book while you're planning the next book. Because I would finish a book and I would have maybe a week off, and then I had to start a new document and hit chapter 1 and start typing. So I had to be ready to hit the ground running on the next book. So I was always preparing the next book while I was editing the last book while I was writing this book. And so that's why I almost went crazy.
Understandable. So if someone is unfamiliar with your books, which one would you suggest they start with?
Well, they can start with any of them because they're not a series. Every single one stands alone. So whatever storyline appeals to you, you can jump in. You're not going to be lost. There's no characters that are in there that you don't already know. My earlier books are set in 1920s England. My later books, I've been playing around with different time periods in the 20th century in the USA. So whatever historical period floats your boat. But that's one of the nice things about my catalog is that it would be nice to write a series, but the benefits of not writing a series is that you just read the back of the book and whatever storyline really thinks would intrigue you, you just jump in.
And then usually I think readers, they like your voice and your style of telling the story. And then they might be more open to another time period or a different plot than they might have been otherwise.
Yeah. And if a reader likes what it is that you do, like they like my ghost stories, they like my type of ghost stories, they like the way I tell them, they like the tone. The time period is one of the lesser things. Like they can jump around from time period to time period if they know they're going to get that story that they really like. I've found that to be quite true.
Well, and now you mentioned ghost stories, and you won an award with the Romance Writers of America, and you've got supernatural elements. So clearly your books span different genres. Is there a way that you describe your stories? If someone says, "What do you write?"
I mean, the basic answer when the layperson asks what I write, I always say that I write ghost stories. That's the easiest thing for them to understand, because the ghost story is the most yes or no sort of part of that equation, where it's like some people, if you say ghost story, they are like, I'm in. And other people, if you say ghost story, they say absolutely never in a million years. And that's totally fine. But like people are kind of like, you'd be like, well, it's kind of suspensey. And then people be like, I don't know, I might try that. But a lot of times you say ghost story and people are like, either give it to me right now, or I have never read one and I never will, which is, that's actually one of the things that surprised me. I didn't realize there were so many anti-ghost story readers out there, but I find enough of them that love what I do that's fine. Like, read whatever makes you happy. But so that I usually boil it down to ghost stories when I'm talking to like a lay person, and they're going to decide whether they're going to like what I read or not. But publishing wise, you get into like a whole bunch of like they're suspense, they're gothic. I think the way my publisher categorizes them is paranormal suspense. I think that's the phrase they use. So that's also kind of descriptive. But like if you say that to a layperson, they'd be like, what is that? And you just say it's a ghost story. And they go, oh, okay.
The shorthand completely works.
Yeah.
Well, and then now I was really excited to be interviewing you, because this is something I've always wondered. Have you ever had an experience with a ghost, or do you have a fascination with supernatural events?
I've never experienced a ghost myself. I think they're possible. I think that everything's possible. I write about ghosts because, frankly, they completely terrify me. They just the idea absolutely terrifies me. If I ever saw a ghost, I would be beside myself. I have ghost nightmares. I've had ghost nightmares in my life. So, I mean, it's just one of the things that scares me. And so I kind of write them. I started writing them partly, like this sort of like a kind of a therapeutic thing where you're like, well, just write about the thing that scares you and dig into why it scares you and what is it about that. And then also I figure that if it's something scares me, it might scare some other people. It's funny because the reaction, being afraid of something or a story, finding a story scary is so individual. Like I have readers who are like, oh, I like this. I mean, it wasn't scary, but I liked it. And then I had a reader a couple weeks ago who emailed me and said, this is not an insult, but I could not finish your book. I was too terrified to even finish it. Like I had to put it down. So, like that's just like such an individual thing. Like you can't really predict how scared people are going to be. So, but I figure some people are going to be creeped out by it because I find it absolutely terrifying. And so that's part of the reason I do it is because it's just something I find just endlessly, truly scary.
I just finished reading your most recent one, The Book of Cold Cases, and I did find it really scary. But I was also so intrigued that there's no way I could have not kept reading. So it wasn't so terrifying that I couldn't go to sleep that night. But I thought you pulled it off beautifully. And it was such an unusual story because somebody said it's like a blend of true crime, which it's not true, but it kind of reads like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things like I wanted to do with that book. Like I read a lot of true crime and I love true crime. And I just kind of thought, well, and I often come to my story ideas from the angle of, well, what do I want to read? And I thought, well, if there was a novel that gave me the same enjoyment that a really good true crime story gives me, I would totally read that. So I was like, well, I guess that's what I'll write. Like, that's just something I would absolutely read 1,000%. So that's what I wrote. So yeah, definitely. But the true crime aspect is completely fictional, which is great, like for the writer, because it's like, I don't have to research facts. I don't have to stick to facts. I'm also not potentially dealing with anyone who's a victim of crime, having to deal with what I'm writing, or anyone who's a family member of the perpetrator of crime, I don't have to deal with any real people at all. I just make up the whole thing, but I give it a real good true crime feel. So that was really enjoyable to write.
Yeah, and it gives you so much, like you said, it gives you so much latitude.
Yeah, for sure.
Without having to do research, which is something a lot of writers say they love research. That's I am not one of them. But...
I am not one of them.
Oh, really? Okay.
Make everything up if I can.
Well, it works for you. I asked about ghosts because I'm very open-minded. When I was 30, my two younger sisters gave me a gift certificate to see a psychic. And it was someone that a friend of a friend had swore by this guy. So I called and made an appointment he had a receptionist.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, it was kind of in an office building. It was like he looked like somebody's grandpa. And I went in and sat down, and this was before Facebook or Google, and there was nothing to Google, even if there had been Google, and he was spot on. I can't even tell you. And he jotted down notes as he was talking really quickly, and I kept that little folded up piece of paper in my wallet for like years and years. So I just kind of feel like when I read books like yours, I'm like, yeah, I'm not ruling anything out.
Yeah, I wrote a book. One of my books has psychics in it. One of my 1920s books is about psychics. That's always fascinated me as well. Again, I've never encountered psychic powers or anything like that, but I'm definitely open-minded to it. I think it's really fascinating.
What we don't know, right?
Yeah.
So what does a writing day look like for you? And do you outline your books?
I do outline somewhat because a publisher needs you to write a synopsis before they'll give you a green light. And the synopsis can be very, very high level. It's not scene by scene. It's like they want to know the gist of it. Who are these characters? Where is it set? What's your main story arc? How does it pan out? How does it end? Like they just kind of wanted a really, really high level overview of that. Like what's the answer to the mystery? They want to know that before you start. And I mean, you could change it. You can change it if you get halfway through and you're like, this mystery is not working. I have to change it. That's something you just work out. But they want to know something before you start. So you have to do a little bit. I don't do an extensive detailed outline, but I do know before I start who my characters are and where it's set and what these characters are doing and what the main mystery is and what the answer to the main mystery is. And that's kind of as far as I know. And from there, I flesh things out as I write. As for a typical day, I don't actually have a typical day. It really depends where I am in the process. I'm not actually like writing every day. Like sometimes I'm in idea gathering mode, sometimes I'm in outlining mode, sometimes I'm in synopsis mode. Then I go through a period where I'm in draft mode, but then I go into editing mode. I do a lot of editing as I go. Like I'll write a chapter and a couple of days later I'll be like, you know what? I just had the best idea of how to make that chapter better, and I'll just go back and fix it. And I've done this long enough now that I know that my process is that I won't keep fixating on one chapter without going forward. Like that, some writers have that problem, but I just don't. Like I'll go back and rewrite my chapter and be like, aha, that's better. And then I just move forward. So I'm going back and forth. Or the other day I wrote 4 pages of notes on about a book I'm working on. Just for stuff about the characters was coming to me. So I just wrote like point form notes. But then I go into drafting mode, and then I'll come out and I'll be in editing, revising mode. Like I try and make it as flexible as possible. So I don't just sit down every day and have a word count. When I'm coming up to deadline and the book, I can't just doodle anymore. The book has to be written. Then yes, I have 5 days a week, daily word count. But even then I'm freshest in the morning. I'm definitely not a nighttime person or a nighttime writer. I have no creativity in the middle of the night. So I'm freshest in the morning. So in draft mode, I try to get up and work first thing with that first cup of coffee and just knock off as many thousand words as I can. But if it takes a couple of hours and I have to start later in the day in order to write the best possible words, then that's what I do. It all comes down to what's going to get the best possible words down on the page that day.
And it's amazing how having a dentist appointment or something can throw you off. Or maybe that's not true for me. Yes.
Even after you get back, you're like, well, I can't be creative now. And it's like, well, I mean, I probably could. It's only 11 o'clock in the morning. But that little voice in your head goes, oh, well, that's the end of that day.
That's right. We'll just...
No.
You have to be disciplined.
Yeah.
Now, I've noticed some of your novels are written in first person and some in third person. And how do you decide that?
I think that's kind of just an organic decision as I get into the writing. I can't really scientifically say why I choose one over the other. I will say I usually prefer writing first person. So third person is kind of a deliberate decision. And I guess maybe it's bringing just a tiny, tiny bit of that distance from the character and giving the reader a little more of that omniscience over the character. And I feel that the story kind of calls for that. The Broken Girls is like a story that there's 6 different points of view. No, 5 points of view. There were so many, two timelines and 5 points of view. So I think that keeping it third person just made those, because there were so many points of view, it made that simpler for the reader to move from one to the other instead of it being super, super drastic and trying to get into all those people's heads so deeply. And in Sundown Motel, I did 2 timelines, and the present day timeline was first person and the past timeline was third person. And I kind of did that because the present day timeline, she was investigating the past. So the past timeline was kind of like a little more distant because she was digging up these details. So that is a very organic thing. It's a very gut feeling thing that I do. And I much prefer first person unless it really is not going to work for the story.
What is your least favorite part of the writing or publishing process?
The least favorite? There's a period after you've written the book and then you've turned it in and then you've revised it with your editor, and then there's usually a second round of revisions where you get really, really into the really, really picky stuff, like just really, really line edit picky stuff. And then you go through it again for copy edits. And then they send it to you and they say, okay, you need to proofread. Like if you want to proofread it, this is your last chance. And by then you have read that book like 300 times. And there is this period right at the end there where you are like, you have read the book so many times that it's just kind of a jumble of words. And you're like, this is terrible. this is awful. Like, because to you, like, there's no suspense anymore. There's nothing, there's no surprises. There's no twists, like there's no character development. The romance is flat. The ending is stupid. You just like, because you've read it so many times. So there comes a brief little period, and I've come to expect it, where right at the end there, where you're like, every piece of this is crap. And then once you get a bit of a break from that book, even if it's a couple weeks or longer, but if you even just get a couple weeks where you haven't, just for once, have not read that book, that one book that you worked on for like 15 months at that point, just 15 months of the same pages over and over, then you go back to it and you're like, oh, no, this is pretty good. But like, there's just that point where you just run right down to the bottom. Like I say, 15 straight months of the same pages. And you're like, I cannot read this again. It's so bad. And then that's when like other people start reading it at your publishing house, and they're like, this is really good. And you're like, okay, if you say so.
Well, and then that has to ease your mind in a big way.
It does for sure, because you are not objective at that point. I mean, you are absolutely the least objective person at that point, because you are the person who's read it 300 times. And the most objective person is someone who's actually picking it up and reading it for the first time.
Mm-hmm. You need fresh eyes.
For sure.
So at what point do you share a manuscript? Do you wait till you're completely done to show it to someone?
I do. No one reads it until I'm done. I mean, I do. I will say that at the very, very beginning, definitely at the, like when I talked about the synopsis that the publisher wants, the sort of high level synopsis, I will have lots of conversations with my editor and with my writing friends. I have a couple good writing friends where I say, is this a good idea? Or how, like, I'm thinking about this character and that character, and then they'll throw stuff at me and be like, what if it's this, or what if it's that? So in the brainstorming stage and in the idea stage, I'm very open to a lot of ideas, and I let my editor in and I let my friends in, and we all brainstorm stuff until I kind of land on what I'm going to do. But when I'm into the actual drafting of the book, it's like the door's closed, everybody out. Like, I think that's what Stephen King says, right with the door closed. Everyone out until I'm done. By the time I turn it in to my publisher, it's not final. Like, it is far from final. It is. I've been through it a couple of times at that point, but I know that it could be better, and I can't really see the weak spots. So I know there are weak spots. And so that's when I need fresh eyes on it. My editor gets it, and my critique partners get it. And they point out where it needs to improve. So it's not even really done at that point, but I have to have drafted it as far as I can. I have to have taken it as far as I can take it before somebody else sees it. Otherwise, I would just die of embarrassment because it's bad.
Well, and sometimes I think people make a offhand comment even, and it might derail you.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. Like, I don't have any armor, while I'm drafting. And like, when someone will be like, well, I don't know, this just seems kind of weird. And like, that's just like a vague word. And you're like, weird? What does that mean? And like, then you're just completely off, and I'm never writing again. So I have to close the door, everybody out. And then I have to like do this little mind trick where I'm like, this is really good. That's what you tell yourself. This is going to be really good. That's how you have to keep telling yourself till you get to the end. And then you can start to accept criticism, but I can't accept criticism in the middle.
I always think that authors are really a strange combination of like arrogant about what we're doing, like, oh, everyone's going to want to read this, and totally insecure. This is complete garbage.
I think exactly the same way. And I'm telling you, it's because while you're writing, you have to do this self-hypnosis thing where you're like, this is going to be amazing. This is the best idea. And like, you have to be like kind of self-hypnosis, like convince yourself of that. Otherwise you will never finish. But then you have to switch modes, and people are like, here's all the parts of your book that don't work. And you have to be like, oh yeah, totally. Yeah, no problem at all. It totally needs improvement. And like, you just have to be able to like flip that switch. And it takes practice, man. But there is this period while you're drafting it where if you are not convinced that this is going to be a great book, you will never finish it.
Is there a book or a story that you've been kicking around in your mind and you're dying to write it, but you haven't just yet for some reason?
Not a specific one. I have always wanted to write a vampire book. I don't have a specific vampire book idea. So if I ever come up with the great vampire idea that I really want to write, I don't even know if my anyone would want to read it or my publisher would want it. I have no idea. And not like a romantic vampire book, like a really terrifying vampire book. I've always wanted to write one.
So maybe someday.
Yeah, if I get the right idea, I'll definitely do it. I don't know if anyone will want to publish it. It might just sit in my files, but that is something that, yeah, if I get the right idea, I would totally do.
So as you think of story ideas or you come across something, do you write it down? Do you have a list somewhere?
No, I probably should do that. The few times I've actually tried that, and then I forget about the list and I find it later and I'm like, yeah, this is good. Probably organized. But no, usually the way it works is I don't need to write it down, because when I get a really good idea that I think that really fascinates me, it just stays in my mind and I can't get rid of it anyway. Even if I'm working on something else that's kind of cooking in the back of my mind, I can always be working on the current project and thinking a couple projects ahead and cooking something up and going, in the back of my mind, I'm like picking up ideas and discarding the ones that don't work. Like, what about this? No. What about this? No. Does this work? No. Oh, that works. Okay. What about this? No. What about this? So like that stuff is always going in the back of my mind. And I just kind of let my computer brain just sort of work on that while I work on the current project.
We get a lot of aspiring writers that are listeners to the podcast. Do you have any craft books or business books for writing that you'd recommend?
Well, my number one is always Stephen King's On Writing. I haven't read that in a year or two, though. I should probably read it again. I can't count how many times I've read it. I don't read a lot of writing books. I did when I was starting out. I did read a lot of writing books, but once I got more confident in my own process, I found the writing books invaded what I already knew worked for me. You have to try everything as a new writer. You have to try every type of process. You have to try outlining and not outlining, and you have to buy software, and you just try everything in notebooks and whatever, and Post-it notes or whatever it is that's going to work for you. So as you're going through trying all of those things, I find writing books were really useful in that period, but I don't read them a lot anymore, except for On Writing.
And along the same lines, do you have any marketing tips for new authors, ways to connect with readers?
Well, you need to set up an email newsletter. It doesn't matter if there's 5 people on it or 10 people on it. An email newsletter if a reader likes your work enough to find the link to your email newsletter, which should be on your website and or your social media somewhere. But if a reader likes your work enough to go to your website or your social media, find that link, click that link, enter their thing, click submit, do the little thing and yes, I'm not a robot. Like if someone goes to all that trouble, that is somebody who wants to hear from you and wants to know when your next book is out. Like that is a very valuable reader. So just having that list, you don't have to promote it in some sort of spammy way or anything, but to have it out there and available and just be like, if you want me to email you the next time when my next book is out, click here, and people will do it over time. My newsletter list is not massive. It doesn't have 10,000 people on it or anything. It's not a huge list, but man, every time I email those people, they pre-order the book. Actually, they don't even just buy it. Like those are people I email and I'm 6 months out and I'm like, there's a new book coming, and they're like, click, I already got it. Right. So, I mean, those are great people. So you want an email newsletter list for sure. And if you're just starting out, most newsletter lists that you can sign up for are free up to I think it's 1,000 or 2,000 subscribers. So for the first couple of years that you have that thing, it will be free. So that's also a free thing you can do. And everyone who signs up opts in, you're not spamming anyone. They can all unsubscribe if they don't want to hear from you. So it's a great, great thing to have. And it's not going to instantly launch you onto a bestseller list, but those readers who really love you will do it. And they're great. That's one of my main ones. And then there's just for new writers starting out, I mean, you want your basic social media, and it's not, I find for me, social media is, I post on it, but social media for me has always been a way, just an alternate way for readers to find you and say hello, and often say that they liked your book.
Mm-hmm.
They message you and they're like, hey, I love your book. And like, well, that's nice to get. So if they can pop onto your Facebook page and write a little thing and instead of emailing you and say, I love your book, then, like, it's just a nice way for readers to come and say hello and feel like they know you a little bit. And you don't have to share your life, and you don't have to be witty, and you don't have to join TikTok and do a bunch of dancing, and you don't have to do all that stuff. But, just to have something out there that readers can find where they can just pop in and say, and you're always like my social media, my Facebook and everything is always like, I've always got a pinned post, which has got my latest book and the links to it. And like some easy thing that's not your website where readers can just come and go, what you have out? Oh, I missed this. I didn't know this book came out. Oh my God, this is so exciting. So like, that's just a very simple thing. You just want readers to be able to find the information about what book you have as easy and as free as possible.
And it's also really nice when readers come on and they mention one of your backlist titles, because you might have a newer reader who discovered you recently. And there's nothing like having a reader endorse a book as opposed to an author trying to say, hey, have you checked out this book? I mean, I think there's value in that.
And like, there's a lot of negatives to social media. Like someone can write a bad review and tag you in it, and then you'll end up seeing it. That happens. But I find that overwhelmingly people want to contact you because they want to say something nice. And even if it's not very often, but like you just, every once in a while you get something nice from a reader. I'm like, man, those things, when you're having a really low career day or a low writing day, a little message from a reader who's like, I love your book, and I passed it to my sister, and I passed it to my mom, and then I went to my book club and we all talked about it, and this is great. Like, man, that'll just lift you up for days.
Mm-hmm. And it'll keep you going because people are waiting for the next book.
100%. When you're sitting there by yourself going, like I say, when you're in that despair period, we're like, this book's terrible. And then you get someone emailing you going, I cannot wait until this book is out. And it's the book that you currently think is, you've read too many times and you're despairing about. And they're like, I can't wait. I just can't wait. I'm so excited. And you're like, oh yeah, right. This book isn't terrible. Readers are happy for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's such a value in that because they didn't have to do it.
No, they don't. And in order to message you like that, they have to like, whatever they're on Instagram or Facebook, they have to like type you into the search bar and look you up and be like, I want to talk to this person. Like it's not something where you're in their face. Like they're coming to find you to say something nice. If someone wants to come find me to say something nice, they can do that all day long. I'm happy to hear it.
Now, does your family read your books?
Not really. I will say that my family usually buys my books because they're very supportive, which is very sweet of them. They will go and buy it and put it on their shelf. I don't really care if they read them. But I mean, they're very, very supportive in general, and they think that it's really cool what I do, and they go buy them and put it, and they tell their friends. And like, that's kind of as far as I need them to do. So, not really, no. The one who did actually read my books was my mom. She passed away a couple of years ago, but she actually did read them. But my whole family's really supportive.
And really proud too, I bet.
Yeah, they're really nice about it.
So how consumed are you with a story when you're in the middle of writing a book? Is it like constantly on your mind?
Yes, it is. Constantly on my mind. I don't even like sit down in front of the computer and like type nonstop. But when I'm not in front of the computer, it's spinning in my brain. The next scene is spinning in my brain. Or like I say, I come up with like that last chapter I just wrote, how I could improve it. And suddenly it clicks, or something about the plot clicks, or like just sometimes you get little things like, you have a character who's the brother, and then you have a character who's a cop, and then suddenly you're like, what if I just merge those characters and the brother is a cop? I'm like, oh, that works so good. And like that just kind of stuff is always going through your brain. And like, oh, I gotta go back and make the brother the cop, and they're the same person. So I mean, like that kind of stuff. And like someone who's not a writer, like just thinks you're nuts because you're just in the middle of having a shower or driving or a dinner, and you're like, oh my God, the cop and the brother. And the person's like, I don't like, what are you doing? But it doesn't. Yeah, when I'm in the thick of it, no, it almost never leaves my mind.
Is there something that you wish people knew about being an author? Some misconceptions you'd like to clear up?
People still think that from day one, it is a extremely well-paying job. It is not. It is, if you want to think of it a little bit more, if like for the layperson, you need to think of it a little bit more. It's like starting a small business. Like that small business doesn't make millions on day one. It doesn't make millions in year one. But if you work at it and you keep at it and you build it and you're smart about it and you do the right things and you sell something that people really want, then it will build. But I still think the average layperson, like you say, oh, my book's getting published, and they're like, oh, you're J.K. Rowling. It's like, no, like there's no more J.K. Rowlings. There's just, just her and the rest of us. So I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that just from the get-go, it's like big money, and it is the opposite of that at the beginning.
Well, they also think that there's always a movie deal around the corner.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, and then they'll just be like, "Why doesn't Martin Scorsese pick up your book?" And it's like, "Well, that's not a thing that happens to most of us." So, but most people don't really get that. It's kind of like how most people still think that Fabio is on romance covers. It's like Fabio has not been on a romance cover in 30 years, but it's like, oh, romance is Fabio. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, guys, go to a bookstore at the time.
Once you get an idea, people get an idea in their head. That's it. It's locked in. It. Can you share what you're working on right now? Or do you not like to talk about it? Some authors don't.
Well, my next book is written. It's with my publisher now. It's not completely done, but it's a single timeline story. I'm not doing a dual timeline for this one. And basically it's about, I don't have a release date or a final title yet, but basically it's about a couple on their honeymoon and they take a wrong turn down a wrong road and they pick up the wrong hitchhiker. Then things go very wrong, and it is a ghost story. And it's going to be really, really fun.
Just from that description, I'm all in. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Was it fun to write?
Oh, it was really fun. And it was fun. The dual timelines are really great, and they're fantastic for the type of story I was writing the last couple books. When you have someone in the present who's researching something or trying to solve a past mystery, you want that past timeline, because otherwise your whole story is just someone like reading newspaper articles, or it's not very interesting. So you want to send the reader back into the action. But this is just a single timeline story. There's no past timeline. So it was a lot of fun to just get on the page with these characters and just follow them nonstop, just really, really intensely through the whole story, through this whole, ramp everything up with these characters. It was a really, really fun write.
We usually wrap up the podcast by asking some fun extra questions. Are you ready, Simone?
Okay, sure.
Okay, just blurt out whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
What is one food that will never get past your lips?
Oh, bugles. Those corn chip.
Do they still make those?
I don't know, but if anyone handed me one, I would never eat it ever.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Well, I would absolutely hate if anyone made a movie about me. It would be very boring, but I'll just say, let me just be flattering to myself. I'll say Natalie Portman. How about that?
Oh, that's a good one. I was going to say Emily Blunt.
Oh, hey,
I kind of see it. What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
Oh, flying. That'd be great.
One. At the end of your life, what do you hope you'll have accomplished?
Being good to the people I love.
What is the worst job you've ever had?
Night shift at a TV station. The worst. I hate working nights. I'm not a night person. I was miserable.
I always say my brain shuts down at 6:30. So nights are not my thing either.
Terrible.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
Drawing. I'm not very good at it, and I've not spent much time getting better at it, but I would love to be really good at drawing.
What is your favorite smell?
Books. Any books. Old books, new books, everything about books.
So you must love trips to the library or bookstores.
Yep.
What is the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
Oh my God, ever done?
Mm-hmm. Ever done. Your whole life.
I don't do terrifying things.
Did you say you don't do terrifying things?
No. I'm scared of everything.
You avoid terrifying. And you write terrifying ghost stories.
Hey, you know what?
Great.
The most terrifying thing I've ever done was send out my first novel to agents and editors and have a bunch of strangers who are actually publishing professionals read it for possibly skewering it and telling me that it sucked. That was terrifying.
That is frightening.
It is.
When people pronounce words incorrectly, do you let them know?
Almost never. Almost never, unless it's really critical for some reason. But I don't just do it as a matter of course.
Our last and final question, if you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Yeah, I think I would. I would do it.
It's all been good, right?
Yeah, it's been pretty good.
Well, thank you so much, Simone, for talking to me today. I just loved hearing about your process and about your books.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. They hope you found it entertaining and informative. If you loved it, tell your friends. And if you have a moment, they'd love for you to post a star rating or review. This has been Behind the Book.